Sarah Davies, and this video tutorial is all about really understanding colour from an application of an adult colourist's point of view. And this is actually part of an 8-week course, so this is lesson 2 of 8 lessons. And the reason I wanted to teach this so early into the course is because understanding colour theory is kind of gives you the building blocks that you need to build on all of the other skills that we're going to learn as part of the course. Now, if you're just finding this on YouTube and just joining in our course here at lesson 2, I would recommend retrospectively going back and enrolling on the full course, because in the first lesson we looked at understanding adult colouring in general and some of the basic tools you need to be able to get started. Now we're going to look at colour theory, but in the subsequent weeks we're going to start and look at different mediums, how to colour, how to blend, how to advance your colouring, and as well as having these tutorials we also have a suite of ebooks. And we have a support centre where you can go on and log on to our Facebook group to get support from your peers or the people who are learning adult colouring. But we also have a suite of free downloadable visuals that you can practice colouring with. So really, it's really easy to get started, and in this course we're going to cover everything it is that you need to know. Now, colour theory. I will warn you, this lesson probably is going to seem really dull compared to all of the other ones, but it's about giving you all of the understanding that you need to really be able to embrace selecting a colour palette and making your images look the best they can do. So for a lot of people, you might just not be interested in understanding colouring theory and you might just be enjoying colouring. For you people there, I would recommend going on to one of the sites, and here's some details of some of the sites that I would recommend, where you can actually just have a look at someone picking a colour palette for you. Or easily just go onto Pinterest and you can do a quick search on colour palette ideas and it will come together. You can put in organised by season, by colour shade, and it will just give you a palette to get started with, and then you can just match up your markers or your pencils to that palette. But for those of you who really want to understand, get your notebook and your pencil out, get ready, because this is going to be a long one. It's probably 10 minutes of intensive understanding, but once you've got the building blocks, you're then going to be able to use this every time you come to colour. The more you use it, the more you will understand it, but I warn you, it is heavy going to get. Now, to improve your colouring skills, you need a basic understanding of what's called the colour wheel. Now, the colour wheel is the simple concept of how colours are organised. So you've got your primary colours, which is your red, your yellow and your blue. Those are the 3 colours that make up the basis of the colour wheel, and they're considered to be the building blocks of every other colour. Now when we say the building blocks, you can take those colours and then by mixing 2 of those colours, you're going to move into what are called the secondary colours. So for example, when you mix the red and the yellow, you get the orange in the middle. You mix the yellow and the blue, and you're going to get a green. Mix the blue and the red and you're going to get a purple. And these are what we term your secondary colours. And this is how they all sit on a secondary colour wheel. Now you can then move from the secondary colours into the tertiary colours, which is when you just mix a primary with a secondary colour, and you can see how that colour wheel really starts to build up. Now if you go and use our complementary ebook to this course, one of the books that we have is all about colour theory, and I would recommend just printing out that book and having that to hand to work with. Either that or just print yourself out or colour out a basic colour wheel, and then every time we reference it you can just look back to your colour wheel and be able to cross-reference what it is that you're doing. Now it's all about then understanding the colour wheel and how to use these colours together. Now what I'm going to do first is take you through a bit of a jargon buster. Because anytime you look up colour theory or start talking to people about colour, they'll start using special words. So I'm going to take you through what those words are, what they mean, and what they will really mean to you as an adult colourist. So, first of all, a hue. Now a hue is the name of the colour. So red, green, blue, yellow, that is the hue. So if you ever hear me referring to hue, it's just another way of saying the name of the colour. Now, once you've got past the hue, you then talk about the saturation of a hue, or the saturation of a colour. And saturation purely means how intense that colour is. So for example, if it's a high saturation, it means it's very bright. Or if it's a low saturation, or what we sometimes refer to as desaturated, that is almost taking all of the colour out. A completely desaturated colour would have no colour in, and it would be just a shade of grey. So when you look at that spectrum, we're going from desaturated up to very, very saturated within each hue. Bear in mind there are millions of hues, so you can now see how you can move across the hue as well as across the saturation of a colour. Now the value, when we talk about the value of a colour, that's talking about how light or how dark that colour is. So how intense it is really. So the value scale here is going to show the full range of values. So your white through your tones through into a black. And within the value, you might hear people talk about shade, tint and tone. As an adult colourist, I don't think you're going to need to worry about these too much. It's more for an artist or for people who are into painting. But a shade is a hue or a colour which is produced by adding more black. A tint is a hue produced by adding more white. Or a tone is a hue or a colour that's produced when you add more grey. So that's more for artists and mixing colours, but if you ever hear about them, I wanted you to be familiar with the terms. Now when we talk about the temperature of a colour, we're talking about how warm or cool it is. And this is as simple as taking the colour wheel and splitting it down the middle. And all of the colours on one side are the warm colours, and all of the colours on the other side are the cool colours. Now you know all of the theory, it's all about understanding how to apply that. So for example, we'll talk about temperature an awful lot and creating contrast with temperature. So you could pick a colour in the warm hues and totally contrast that with a colour in the cool hues, and that would give you immediate contrast, visual contrast in your image, because you're choosing two colours from different temperature ranges. Now, there are a number of different ways that you can create contrast in your image based on your now new understanding of the colour wheel and colour theory in general. And there are many different ways that artists talk about, but I think there are three ones that are going to be really easy for you to understand as an adult colourist and start and apply to your colouring. The first one is called an analogous colour scheme, okay? Now, an analogous colour scheme is where you choose colours which sit next to each other on the colour wheel. So you choose 2 to 4 colours beside each other, and actually if you want to widen your palette to work with as an adult colourist, you're basically going to choose as many colours as you want within a small section of that colour wheel, and colouring those together is what we call an analogous colour scheme. Now the next type of scheme is called a triadic colour scheme, and that's where you're going to choose 3 colours which are equally spaced from each other on the colour wheel. Now with a triadic colour scheme, you don't want to go beyond those 3 because that's when you're going to start muddying the water a little bit. So triadic, you're just going to choose them basic 3 colours to colour with. And the third type of scheme that we're going to talk about here is called a split complementary colour scheme. So that is when you choose your primary colour of your image, so you choose that primary colour on the colour wheel, and then follow that to the opposite end of the colouring wheel. But instead of taking the immediately opposite colour, take one shade to the left of it and one shade to the right of it. So you get 2 colours which are almost completely opposite your main colour. And that's what we call a split complementary colour scheme. Now, colour schemes aren't just about having colours that look pretty together. If it was, you wouldn't need to understand all that theory you've just explained. Every part of a colour scheme needs to have a purpose and a reason for being there. It's not just a set of random colours that you've put together. Now the basic building block of any colour scheme is it needs to have contrast. As long as you put contrast into your colour scheme, and there's lots of different ways you can do that which we're going to cover, you use contrast as the main building block, then you build the rest of the scheme around that contrast. Now that you've understood the theory, or hopefully you will have understood the theory. I'm not going to ask how many times you've just watched all of that back and scribbled down some notes. But now that you've got that understanding, we're going to put our first colour scheme together. So the first thing you need to do is decide what the mood of your colour scheme is. So is it contemporary? Is it whimsical? Is it feminine? Is it jazzy? Is it a little bit more soulful? Choose an overall mood and feeling for your image. And the next thing you need to do is choose your main colour. Now once you've got your main colour, you then need to decide whether you're going to go with analogous, a triadic or a split complementary colour scheme, or something straightforward such as a normal complementary one where you're just working with 2 colours. So choose your colour, you choose your colour theory as it was, then choose your colours within that. So I'm going to recommend you go with about 5 colours in each colour scheme. And once you've got your 5 core colours, you then want to start and choose a level of saturation. And you want to aim for all of your colours in that theme to be of the same sort of saturation level. So if you've got some really, really bright colours over here and then some really desaturated ones, you're creating another point of contrast in the image when you've already decided the point of contrast is going to be the colours. Now you can use saturation as a way to point that out, and I'll show you that with an example later on in the video, but on the whole, unless you're specifically choosing saturation as your way to differentiate, you're going to want to choose the same colours in the same level of saturation. And once you've got that, you're ready to go, you're ready to start colouring. So let's look at a few examples and applications of where I've used this colour theory we've just talked about to put a colour scheme together. So in this first section, we're going to look at a split complementary colour scheme. So remember I said you always choose your primary colour to begin with. So here we've chosen red. Now when I say choose your primary colour, it doesn't have to be just one pen. So here what we're doing is actually using the Spectrum Noir pens, and we're working with the corals. So what we've got in this one is we're blending between Coral 8, Coral 9 and Coral 10 just to get a little bit of dimension in there. So red is our primary colour, so that is what we've chosen to create the middle piece of the petal in that nice bright red colour. Then it's all about creating a complementary blend to go with it. So because we're working on the split complementary, opposite red would be green, and going to one side of green would be blue violet, the other side would be blue green. So starting off with the blue violet. So again, not just using one colour, we're blending with a few here. We're using the TBs, so we're using TB 3, 4 and 5. That's starting with a bit of TB 5. Blending these in, and this is our Spectrum Noir colouring system. For anyone who's unfamiliar with this system, this is a system of alcohol pens where we've tried to dumb it down and make it easy for people who perhaps haven't worked with alcohol pens before and don't know colours that work together. And remember, I also said you can download the ebook that goes with this. This will then take you through the different colour schemes that we've got within Spectrum Noir and where they sit on the colour wheel. Now you can see those TBs sitting opposite the red work beautifully well. It gives that perfect contrast because we've used colours at opposite ends of the spectrum. Now, you're going to do the same again. You're going to colour the same base petal in the red, and this time I'm going to show you the difference it's going to make when we use the blue greens. Now, it works in just exactly the same way. It works just as well. And this is all about if you want to have a wider colour scheme. So yes, we could have coloured the same outer part of this petal in the same blues and it probably would have looked lovely. But if you want to introduce a third colour so that you've got that 3 colours in the scheme, obviously we're using the split complementary scheme, so we've got the blue green on one side, whereas we had the blue violet on the separate side. Now in this example, the primary colour that we've selected are the bright pinks. And again, we're working onto one of the glittered colouring surfaces from the Colorista range and using the Spectrum Noir pens. And you can see we're getting that perfect blend from a dark pink through to a lighter pink by using the BPs here. And we're using BP started off with 6, blending through to 4, and then on the tips we're going to use BP1. Now, BP, as the name would suggest, is a really bright colour. So for the core laydown of colour, I've chosen that lovely, lovely bright colour, and then what we want to do is create a contrast in the background. Now I've created that contrast by taking a complementary colour. So opposite the bright pinks, you're going to have these more muted turquoisey, greeny colours. However, we can then use different levels of saturation. So let me first of all say we've started with the bright colours and we're going to switch to therefore a very desaturated colour in the background. So I'm using the very, very pale blue turquoises. Now starting with the very, very palest colour, you can immediately see the contrast that we get having a very, very pale BT, blue turquoise, contrasting against that very, very bright pink. But again, because we're using the blendable alcohol pens, you can blend out from a paler colour into a much darker colour, well I'm saying much darker, a slightly darker colour there, and get that perfect blend. And remember, lesson 4 of this course is all going to be about getting a blend with alcohol pens. So if you want to understand how we're achieving these techniques of blending across different shades within a colour family, you need to watch lesson 4. Now if we contrast that, this is giving you a complementary colour scheme with a bright and saturated. However, we can then start and look at the difference of when you use a bright colour in contrast to a bright colour. So here I'm starting off again with the blue turquoises because that's opposite the bright pinks in the colour wheel. However, this time I'm using a very dark, a much darker shade. So you can see it's still giving the same effect, but it doesn't quite pop off the page as much as it was when we used the lighter colour. So this is just for you to be able to see the two different levels just by using a different tone of colour, different shade, or a different level of desaturation. So here we're looking at a completely different way of creating contrast. We're going to use temperature this time. So I'm starting off by colouring the inside part of the flower here, again colouring with the blendable pens and colouring onto the glitter cardstock, but we're doing this using the warm shade, so using the oranges. And you're going to get that beautiful blend, create an all over blend in the leaf, but you can see our main focal point of the image is done in these warm colours. Now you'll see here, as we go over and over the same area, how you can build up that depth in the colour. Again, this is something we're going to talk more about in lesson 4 when we talk about blending with alcohol pens. And you can see just layering more and more, because you're sitting the pen on top of the glitter card here, it's not actually drying, which makes it much easier for you to move around or actually bleach out, as you'll learn all of this, with the lighter shade. Now, once you've created all over that warm part in the leaf, you're going to want to create the contrast in the background. So we're going to go with a colour from the opposite side of the colour wheel. It doesn't have to be directly opposite, but where we've used the warm shades in the orange here, we're going to contrast that and use the much darker shades of the blues. And you can see just laying down that colour immediately around the outside of the petal just makes that clear differentiation. Oh, this is the background. We've got our petal in the foreground and you've got that darker colour in the background. And again, just blending through so that you can get shading. You don't have to shade, you could just use a straight opposite colour. You could get the same shading with pencils as we're doing with pens here. I've just chosen pens because it's a little bit quicker and easier to show you here. But you can see how we've achieved that contrast. And there's so many different ways to achieve the contrast using the colour theory that we've been looking at. That's colour theory explored, and hopefully what I'll have done there is given you the building blocks that you need to be able to put together some really exciting palettes to work with in your adult colouring. Even if you quite haven't grasped everything that we've talked about there, just understanding the basic principle of having contrast in any one of your images and where contrast can come from is going to help you enormously to get a really great finished result, something that you're really proud of, as opposed to looking at something and thinking, it doesn't quite work, but I can't quite see why it doesn't work. Now remember, this video tutorial is just part of our advanced adult colouring course. So if you've just found us on YouTube and you've liked what we've learned in this session here and you want to get the other course materials, all you need to do is click on the link that's below and that's going to take you off to enrol in our course. It's completely free, there's absolutely no catches, all we want to do is teach you more about adult colouring. And certainly one of the things I recommend you download to go with this specific course is our ebook on understanding colour theory, because a lot of the things I've talked about are covered in that book, and a lot of great visual references where you can just look at the colour wheel, see which colours are going to match each other. Also, all of the products that I've been using today are all from our Spectrum range, and that is whether you're looking at the special pads that we've used, which are our Colorista pads with the foil and the glitter in, whether you're working with the blendable alcohol pens that we've talked about, they're from our range. We've got blendable pencils in there, and the accompanying ebook will take you through the exact colour mediums and which colours within those mediums work on which areas of the colour wheel. But also, just as well as having the ebooks and the course content, remember we've got a lot of free downloads that you can download and colour with, and we've also got a special Facebook event that's created to accompany this course, where there are thousands of other adult colourists all sharing their hints, tips and techniques with each other and helping each other learn. So hopefully if you go on after looking at this and search for colour theory in there, you'll see a lot of people have been talking about colour theory and sharing their different ideas. Now, I do hope you can tune in next week, those of you that are following this as a course, because we're going to be looking at blending with coloured pencils. So for me, now you've learned all of the basics you need to know for adult colouring, it's about taking that skill up to the next level and achieving some really, really professional blends. So make sure you tune in for the next lesson, and I look forward to seeing you then.